Anna, my colleague, asked me to be the godmother of her son. I assumed he was a little kid in kindergarten, so I agreed. However, later that evening, a young, tall, and very fit guy had me pinned against the couch, his husky voice calling me godmother. At my new job, I quickly became close friends with my colleague Anna. She said we clicked instantly and insisted on making me her sister. Not only that, but she enthusiastically invited me to be the godmother of her son. I assumed Anna had a child later in life and that her son was a little boy in kindergarten. However, after work that evening, a handsome young man was waiting at the company entrance. Dressed in a black casual outfit, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, he looked stunning. I couldn't help but steal a glance or two before I saw Anna waving at him, calling out, "Michael! Over here!" Anna turned to me and explained with a proud smile, "This is my son." What? Her son? I froze for a moment. Anna, you have a younger son? Nope, Anna said, her face full of pride as she talked about him. I only have one son. He graduated from a prestigious university, and now he's a doctor. Whether he's a doctor or not didn't matter. What mattered was this tall, strapping young man, who towered over me, was supposed to call me godmother? I'd rather die. I tried to flee, but Anna grabbed me enthusiastically. "Fiona, don't go. Tonight, your godson will treat us to dinner." I forced a bitter smile, unable to refuse in time as the man approached. "Mom," he greeted Anna in a low, velvety voice that was almost unfairly attractive. Anna held onto my hand and cheerfully introduced us. "Michael, this is Fiona Chase. I think you two will get along wonderfully." Michael's brows furrowed slightly, and he declined politely, "Mom, I've told you many times I'm not interested in dating right now." Anna glared at him. "What nonsense are you spouting? Fiona's my newly sworn sister. You two have similar personalities. Just call her your godmother already." The atmosphere turned awkwardly silent. "Godmother?" Michael raised an eyebrow and finally looked at me. When our eyes met, I swallowed nervously. This godson was going to be the death of me. Great body, perfectly handsome face. After giving me a once-over, Michael suddenly smirked and said, "A godmother this young?" I had no rebuttal. Thankfully, Anna was assertive enough to shove me into Michael's car and give him orders, "Drive. Fiona just moved here, take her to one of the local specialty restaurants." Michael got into the car and glanced at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes seemed to soften, and he let out a light chuckle. "All right." About 10 minutes later, the car pulled into a ground-level parking lot. Michael unbuckled his seatbelt, got out, and opened the door for me. His eyes lingered on me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "After you, godmother." He seemed to have accepted the whole godmother thing surprisingly quickly. The word rolled off his tongue smoothly, almost naturally. After getting out of the car, Michael led Anna and me into a private dining restaurant. It wasn't until we were seated that he casually commented, "This place is well known. You should give it a try." I nodded awkwardly, murmuring a soft, "Thank you." Anna's enthusiasm was boundless. As she poured me a glass of wine, she explained why she wanted Michael to acknowledge me as his godmother. First, she said, it was because she felt a special bond with me and had decided we were like sisters. And since we were sisters, it was only natural for Michael to call me his godmother. The second reason, Anna explained, was tied to a saying from a fortune teller back in her hometown. According to this belief, having someone recognize your child as their godson or goddaughter would bring new romantic opportunities into their life. I was dumbfounded. This was the first time I had ever heard of such a thing, and my face must have shown my disbelief. Anna held my hand, sighing deeply and earnestly. "Fiona, you tell me Michael is perfect in every way. But when it comes to relationships, he's completely clueless. It's driving me crazy." Perhaps unwilling to listen to his mother's nagging, Michael stood up abruptly and went to the restroom. As soon as he walked away, Anna leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Actually, I originally wanted you to date Michael. But," she sighed again, "unfortunately, Michael doesn't like girls." My heart instantly sank. So that's how it was. I had wondered why such an extraordinary guy could still be single. Turns out he's gay. When Michael returned, my gaze toward him subtly changed, losing some of its earlier excitement. I had initially thought having a handsome godson would be thrilling, even a little fun. But now, it seemed I'd gained a goddaughter instead. What a shame. The thought left me staring blankly at the table full of dishes. My appetite gone. What are you thinking about, Fiona? A piece of chicken landed on my plate. I looked up to see Michael gazing at me, his brow slightly raised. That face, it was breathtakingly handsome. It was only then that I realized Anna was nowhere to be found. Before I could ask, Michael answered preemptively, "My mom went to the restroom." "Okay," I replied, though the air felt awkward. To break the tension, I asked some light-hearted questions. "So, where did you go to college?" "Medical school in S City," he replied. I asked, he answered, but the atmosphere remained stiff and formal. Feeling a bit uneasy, I took a sip of red wine and asked casually, "Do you read novels?" "Yes." As a fellow book lover, I immediately perked up. "What kind of novels do you like?" Michael leaned back slightly, resting one arm on the table. His tone was casual, but his words were deliberate. "I like romance novels about older women falling in love with younger men." Michael's expression remained serious, not even the slightest hint of a smirk. But I could swear there was a playful glint in his eyes, teasing and deliberate. I was convinced he was doing it on purpose. He might as well have just said, "I enjoy stories about men falling in love with their godmothers." I was still trying to figure out how to respond when Anna returned. With Anna back, the mood shifted. It was impossible not to feel at ease around her infectious enthusiasm. Just as we were nearing the end of the meal, a small surprise occurred. When Anna went to the restroom a second time, she ran into an old friend who, in her excitement, dragged Anna off to catch up and go shopping together. Anna patted my hand apologetically, saying, "Fiona, it's been ages since I last saw my friends, so I'm going to chat with them for a bit. When you're done with dinner, let Michael drive you home. He's a safe driver, so I trust him." Before I could refuse, Anna left happily with her friends. I swallowed hard and turned to Michael. He was watching me with an amused look, his gaze mischievous. When he saw me turn to him, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Let's finish dinner, godmother." The way he carried himself, the composure, the tone, felt nothing like a doctor. He was more like a mob boss. I stayed silent for a moment, glanced at the mostly untouched food on the table, and said, "I'm full." Michael glanced at me sideways. "You're done eating? Seems like your appetite isn't as big as it looks." I glared at him. What kind of comment was that? Did I look like someone with a big appetite? Michael raised his hand and called over the waiter. "Excuse me, check, please." Once the bill was settled, we walked out of the restaurant together. "Michael." As we exited, I awkwardly called his name. After all, he could call me godmother. But there was no way I could call him son. Michael held the glass door open for me and stepped aside to make room. I pulled my coat tighter as I stepped out. "Let's exchange contact info," I said. "I'll send you the money for dinner." Michael lowered his gaze and looked at me for a few seconds, before suddenly laughing. "Godmother? That's such a cliched way of asking for my number." I shot him a glare. "Don't flatter yourself. I just want to split the bill with you," since I pressed my lips together. "Since I'm your godmother." Even though, technically, this godmother was only 2 years older than him. Michael smirked, entirely unaffected by my irritation. He rattled off a phone number and added, "That's my WhatsApp number." I paused for a moment before opening my phone to add him. His profile picture was a simple backshot, and his username was straightforward, Michael. By comparison, my godmotherly profile picture, a cat photo, looked downright childish. After adding him, we both got into the car. I was about to transfer him the money for dinner when a hand suddenly pressed down on my phone screen. It was pale, long-fingered, and perfectly proportioned. That was my immediate thought. When I looked up, his side profile came into view. Some people are just made unfairly perfect. Every glance only deepens your amazement at how flawless they are. Michael was one of those people, 360 degrees of pure perfection, no weak angles. "Tonight's on me," he said casually. "Just treat me to dinner next time." With that, there wasn't much room for argument. I nodded in agreement. After asking for my address, Michael drove me home. At the entrance to my apartment complex, he turned to me. "Do you need me to walk you upstairs?" "No," I said quickly, unbuckling my seatbelt. My tone was formal as I added, "Drive safely on your way back." "Got it." After I got out of the car, I saw Michael roll down the window and rest one arm on the frame. He lit a cigarette, the orange glow illuminating his sharp features. He looked handsome. I didn't dare stare too long. I waved briefly and hurried inside. What a fascinating guy. A doctor, yet his demeanor carried an edge of rebellion. Despite being 2 years younger than me, he always seemed to take the lead. And as devastatingly handsome as he was, of course, he had to be gay. That night, I slept surprisingly well. It was a genuinely good dream I dreamt about Michael. In the dream, he had me cornered on a couch, his expression warm and intimate. He leaned down and kissed my earlobe gently, before murmuring, "Godmother, what was that all about?" The dream stopped abruptly, and I woke up, sitting in bed for a while as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. But instead, I felt a growing tightness in my chest. I'd been experiencing this chest pain for several days now, but today, it felt especially pronounced. Worried, I went online to look up symptoms. Following the advice I found, I pressed around my chest and thought I felt a lump. I'm naturally a bit of a coward, and the more I thought about it, the more frightened I became. So, I requested a day off from my boss and took a cab to the hospital. It might have been because it was a weekday, but the hospital was unusually quiet that morning. There were only 2 people ahead of me, and after waiting for a short while in the hallway, I heard the nurse call my name. I entered the doctor's office and froze. It was a male doctor. He was sitting against the light with his head lowered, making it hard for me to see his face. I walked to the desk and sat down, starting to explain, "Doctor, I'd been feeling some chest pain for the past 2 days, and before I could finish, the doctor looked up. My words stopped dead in my throat as I recognized him. I almost cursed it out loud. The male gynecologist in the white coat, holding a pen between his fingers, was none other than Michael. His smile was faint but maddeningly smug. "Fiona? Michael?" I was so stunned that I stammered. Michael raised an eyebrow slightly, resting his elbows on the desk, his hands clasped together as he looked at me nonchalantly. "Where are you feeling unwell? With our relationship, I'll be sure to give you a thorough checkup." He was definitely doing this on purpose. Sitting across from him, I felt caught in a dilemma, neither able to leave nor stay. I hesitated for a long moment before Michael spoke up again, his tone mildly impatient. "Fiona? There are other patients waiting outside, you know. In other words, hurry up." Gritting my teeth, I exhaled and forced myself to stay calm. "Doctor, I've been having chest pain recently." When I pressed on the area, it felt like there might be a lump. Michael glanced at my registration slip and then back at me. "Lie down on the bed. I'll examine you." My face burned red, but I saw him gesture toward the black leather examination bed in the corner. After a brief hesitation, I got up and walked over, sitting down on the edge. "Lie down," he instructed. "Doctor, it's my chest that hurts, not my backside." "Why do I need to lie down?" Michael raised an eyebrow, his tone unyielding. "Who's the doctor here, you or me?" After a moment's pause, I reluctantly lay down. Michael walked over and pressed on the spot I had indicated earlier. "Does it hurt here?" "Yes." "How about here?" "Also hurts." Whether it was because I was nervous or just overly sensitive, it felt like pain everywhere he touched. Seeing his brows furrow, I grew even more anxious, my mind spinning with catastrophic scenarios. The fear quickly overshadowed any embarrassment. Looking back, he was professional throughout the entire examination and didn't do anything inappropriate. "Get up." After finishing the checkup, Michael glanced at me before turning back to his desk. "You'll need to get a CT scan." In just a few quick strokes, Michael wrote out an order and handed it to me. I stole a glance at his expression. It was neutral, devoid of any humor. My heart sank as I took the form and hurried out. After the scan, I returned to his office with the report, nerves jangling. Is it bad? Michael glanced at me briefly, adjusting his glasses as he did so. It was only then that I noticed he wore glasses while working simple frames perched on his nose, giving him a scholarly but slightly roguish air. It's nothing serious. You're probably just not getting enough sleep. I was dumbfounded. That's it? What else were you expecting? I pursed my lips, my voice lowering unconsciously. But this morning, I thought I felt a lump. Michael glanced at his computer and responded matter-of-factly, psychosomatic. All right then. Either way, my heart finally settled, and miraculously, the chest pain seemed to have vanished too. I was still debating whether to say a few words of thanks before leaving when Michael suddenly said, Fiona, actually you came to the wrong doctor. I froze, then double-checked the department sign. No, I didn't. I came to see a gynecologist. Michael pointed to his chest and said casually, You're feeling pain here. You should have gone to the breast surgery department. Why didn't you say so earlier? Michael leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes glinting with faint amusement as he looked at me. Because today's breast surgeon on duty is also a man. And honestly, for something this minor, I can handle it. No need to let another man touch you. So, what he meant was that while it wasn't necessary for another man, it was somehow necessary for him? Of course. I wasn't bold enough to ask that out loud. I quickly mumbled my thanks and fled the office, my face burning red the entire way out. Whether it was truly psychosomatic or Michael's brief examination actually helped, I didn't know. What I did know was that the chest pain miraculously disappeared completely. Finally, I felt relieved. Since I had already taken the day off, I decided not to go back to work in the afternoon. Instead, I planned to meet up with my best friend, go shopping, get my nails done, and maybe even hit the club later that night. One phone call was all it took to get Olivia to join me. Olivia, my wealthy and fun-loving friend, never said no to an outing. But this time, she turned down my suggestion to hit the club. Her reason was simple and direct. There was a car show happening at a nearby square that evening. And there would be plenty of handsome male car models. Well, who could resist that? Cars. Male models. I was sold. We agreed to meet in the afternoon to shop, do our makeup, and then head out looking our best to admire some gorgeous men. The afternoon flew by in a blur of fun. After changing into our newly bought outfits, getting full-body massages, and feeling radiant, we arrived at the car show square. But the first person I saw in the crowd wasn't a male model. It was Michael. What kind of karmic twist was this? How did I keep running into my godson everywhere I went? The moment I saw his face, I panicked. Olivia, I tugged on her wrist, maybe we should just leave, but Olivia brushed my hand off. Her eyes gleaming as she fixated on a car. Don't bother me. I've spotted a treasure. I assumed my little heiress friend had her eye on one of the cars. After all, many of the vehicles on display today were marketed toward female drivers, which explained the abundance of tall, handsome male models. The organizers clearly understood their target audience. But I underestimated Olivia. Her treasure wasn't one of the sleek cars or the male models. It was Michael. I followed behind her, watching helplessly as she strutted up to where Michael was inspecting a car. With exaggerated flair, she leaned against the car door, her ultra-short skirt riding high as she smiled coquettishly. Hey, handsome. Shopping for a car? She looked every bit like one of the car show's female models, flashing a sultry smile at Michael. Olivia was undeniably beautiful. Her skin was fair, her figure stunning, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in luxury. There was a natural allure to her that almost never failed. But in front of Michael, her charm seemed to have no effect. Michael glanced at her briefly, his tone indifferent. Just browsing. Then, without another word, he turned back to the car for one last glance before pivoting to leave. And as he turned, he came face-to-face with me. We collided head-on. Michael paused, and a faint smile flashed in his eyes. What a coincidence, godmother. I forced an awkward laugh and was about to respond when he curved his lips slightly and added another remark. Still hurting? The chest pain was gone. But now my head hurt. I gave him a strained smile, trying to downplay our connection. Much better, thank you. At that moment, Olivia walked over, looping her arm through mine. Her gaze openly fixed on Michael. Fiona, is this handsome guy a doctor? Judging by the look in Olivia's eyes, Michael had been marked as her next target. But for some inexplicable reason, I felt a faint sense of resistance in my heart. I told myself it was probably just my godmotherly responsibility. I didn't want to see my godson fall victim to someone like Olivia, a mischievous little seductress. Though, with Michael's stunning looks, it was hard to tell who'd end up victimizing whom. Michael's gaze finally landed on Olivia when she looped her arm through mine. As their eyes met, Olivia gracefully introduced herself. Hi. I'm Olivia, Fiona's best friend. Michael gave a slight nod, but his introduction left me on edge. He glanced at me with a faint, teasing smile and said calmly, Hi, I'm Michael, Fiona's godson. Did this man have no shame? How could he just throw that out there so openly? For once, I saw Olivia lose her composure. Her eyes widened as she turned to me, then shoved my shoulder with her soft hands. Fiona. When did you get yourself such an incredible godson? I didn't answer. It wasn't something that could be explained in just a few words. But Olivia wasn't wrong, Michael was incredible. Dressed in a gray trench coat today, his tall, lean figure and broad shoulders made him look like a walking mannequin. He was the very definition of a dreamboat. While I was discreetly admiring Michael, Olivia was sneaking glances at me. I thought she was gearing up to make a move on him, but to my surprise, she acted out of character. After a brief exchange of pleasantries with Michael, she grabbed my arm and pulled me away. No more car show, no more male models. Olivia dragged me straight to a bar. In her car, I was still confused. You're not staying to see the models? Olivia laughed at my question, giving me a sidelong glance as she replied. I'm taking you clubbing instead and I'll teach you how to win him over. I blinked in confusion. Win over who? As we stopped at a red light, Olivia rested one hand on the steering wheel, turned her head, and winked at me with a sly smile. Your godson, of course. She emphasized the word godson with a teasing lilt. For some inexplicable reason, my face flushed red. Who said I wanted to win him over? Olivia had naturally seductive, fox-like eyes. And her expertly applied makeup only heightened her allure. When she narrowed her eyes slightly, she always looked like she could see straight through someone. She gave me a knowing glance, her eyebrows raising slightly. With the way you were looking at him earlier, it's a wonder you didn't strip him on the spot. Was it that obvious? Feeling guilty, I fell silent and didn't argue back. I did manage a feeble protest. His mom said. He doesn't like women. I expected Olivia to sigh and lament the wasted potential along with me. Instead, she simply let out a light scoff. Trust me, with the way he looks at you? There's definitely something there. As the light turned green, Olivia drove off, adding one last remark. This whole not liking women thing? Sounds like a convenient excuse to keep his family off his back. If someone else had said that, I might have argued back. But Olivia? Her family had been pressuring her to marry and even wanted her to enter an arranged marriage with the son of a business partner. Backed into a corner, Olivia finally lied and claimed that she liked me. Now, Olivia's entire family, even their dog, was under the impression that Olivia liked me. So, given her track record, maybe her assessment of Michael wasn't entirely impossible. With nothing but green lights along the way, we soon arrived at our usual bar. Parking. Entering the bar. Olivia wasted no time grabbing her usual drink and ordering some snacks and cocktails, clearly intending to get me drunk. Before Olivia could even start her mission, she stepped away to use the restroom, and I ran into an old acquaintance. My ex-boyfriend. Scott White. Just hearing the name alone might make people think we were the perfect match. Fiona and Scott. But in reality, that man was trash. We dated for 2 years in college, during which I gave him my all, only for him to cheat on me not once, but repeatedly. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could walk to a nearby store to buy a pack of cigarettes and run into multiple girls he had slept with. The final straw was when someone uploaded compromising photos of him with dozens of women to the school forum. While his reputation was utterly ruined, I became the target of mockery. The sweet posts I had shared on social media about our relationship turned into jokes for everyone. When we broke up, Olivia showed up with her family's security team and gave Scott a well-deserved beating. As Scott threatened to call the police, she coolly tossed a stack of cash in his face and walked away with her arm around me. Olivia had always been effortlessly dashing. Thinking back on our years of friendship, it was always her protecting me. Lost in thought, I barely noticed Scott walking up to me. He sat down beside me, holding a drink, with a voluptuous woman trailing behind him. Fiona? Isn't this my ex-girlfriend? That face hadn't changed much, though now it was somehow even more nauseating. I felt a wave of revulsion. Don't call me your ex. It's disgusting. Besides, I added with a sneer, if we're being honest, I wouldn't even know what number girlfriend I was to you. Scott sipped his drink and leaned closer, chuckling softly in my ear. No, you definitely count as an ex-girlfriend. He gestured toward the woman beside him, smirking. They're just hookups. Scott was revolting. I leaned back to create some distance, glancing at the curvy woman by his side. She was staring at her phone, seemingly oblivious to Scott's conversation with me. My eyes fell to the check she was holding. A sizable amount. She was cashing in happily. Scott followed my gaze, before turning back to me with a grin. I told you. I only mess around with them. I had no desire to continue this pointless conversation, so I shifted to another seat and snapped, if you've got something to say, say it. If not, leave. Scott wasn't fazed. The man had truly mastered the art of shamelessness. He chuckled and leaned closer again, even reaching out to grab my hand. I pulled back in time and his hand missed. Fiona, he said, his tone unusually earnest. To be honest, after all these years, I'm tired of fooling around. Let's get back together. I stared at him, utterly incredulous. Was he serious? How could he even say something like that with a straight face? Yet Scott seemed oblivious to my reaction as he continued, Fiona, during these years apart, I couldn't stop thinking about you. I'd been with so many women, but none of them were as special as you. I sat there sipping my drink, not sparing Scott another glance. Did he really think this was some grand display of affection? Scott didn't get the chance to continue. Olivia had returned. And without asking a single question, she poured an entire drink over Scott's head. I glanced at her, feeling a slight pang for the wasted alcohol. Olivia stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of me. Scott, still harassing Fiona? Guess we didn't beat you hard enough last time, huh? Scott wiped the alcohol from his face, his expression darkening. Olivia, don't think I won't hit a woman. Olivia's smile was full of disdain. Scott, don't think I'm bluffing either. You lay a finger on either of us tonight, and I'll have your entire family wiped out tomorrow. They stood there, locked in a tense standoff, but in the end, Scott caved. He grabbed the voluptuous woman beside him and left, muttering, psycho. Thanks to Scott's interruption, my mood plummeted. Memories of his betrayals surged back all at once. Scott might been scum, but those post-breakup days were hell for me. 2 years of dating over 700 days together and I had given him my all. That's why his betrayal had been so hard to accept. If it hadn't been for Olivia, I might never have gotten through it. Don't be upset. Let's drink, Olivia said, patting my shoulder. I stayed silent, pouring 2 drinks and handing one to her. Olivia, the pampered heiress known for her fiery temper, always had an uncanny ability to read my emotions. Your emotional state often dictates your alcohol tolerance, and that night, I drank myself into oblivion. After coaxing me and joining me in cursing Scott countless times, Olivia eventually grabbed my phone and called someone. I wanted to ask who she called, but my pounding headache made me collapse onto the table and drift off. The next time I woke up, I seemed to be leaning against someone warm and comforting. I opened my eyes to find myself cradled in someone's arms. As my gaze moved upward, I was met with a face that was almost unfairly handsome. Even from this awkward upward angle, he looked like perfection. I squinted at him, studying his face for a moment before finally piecing together his name from my muddled thoughts. Michael? Yes. Fueled by the lingering effects of alcohol, any sense of shame was long gone. I didn't ask where he was taking me or why I was in his arms. Instead, I wrapped my arms around his neck, adjusted myself into a more comfortable position in his embrace, and fell back asleep. When I woke again, Michael was carrying me into a room. It seemed to be a hotel. I frowned, scanning my unfamiliar surroundings. Michael placed me gently on the bed. Get some sleep. I'll stay by your side, he said softly as he removed my shoes and socks, tucking me under the blanket. I was drunk. Properly, hopelessly drunk. So drunk that I mistook Michael for someone else. Just as he was about to stand up, I grabbed his wrist with pinpoint accuracy. Everyone knows I'm terrible when drunk, prone to making a scene and ridiculously strong. In one swift motion, I yanked Michael down onto the bed and flipped us over so I was on top of him. You cheated on me? I snapped. Do they look better than me? Michael froze for a moment, then slowly shook his head. Do they have a better body than me? I demanded. Michael shook his head again. I shouted angrily, and you dared to cheat? Do you have any idea how much regret and humiliation that was for me? Michael stayed silent for a long moment. When he realized I was glaring at him, waiting for an answer, he pursed his lips and reluctantly murmured, sorry. Sorry? What good is sorry? Just the thought of you makes me sick. I interrupted him with a shout, then grabbed his jaw and turned his face side to side for a closer look. You're not Scott, why are you so handsome? And with that, fueled by liquid courage, I leaned down and kissed him. When I woke up, I was completely stunned. What had I done last night? This wasn't the hotel I remembered from the blurry haze of last night, it was my own apartment. I had been so drunk that I didn't even recognize my own home and thought it was a hotel. And in my bed lay a man. A very handsome, sleeping man. Upon closer inspection, I nearly screamed. It was my newly adopted godson, Michael. I stared at his face for a long time, groaning in frustration as I pressed my fingers to my temples. I couldn't remember a thing from last night. What a pity. Fiona. A voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. I turned my head, trembling slightly, to see Michael watching me quietly. His gaze was intense, and there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. Turns out, it's impossible to resist something beautiful. I stared at him, completely blank. I opened my mouth to speak, but couldn't manage a single word. Has your chest pain gone away? I didn't know why he suddenly asked that, but I frowned and answered honestly, it doesn't hurt anymore. Michael nodded, a small smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. But I'm in pain. With that, Michael pulled back the blanket a little, revealing a deep bite mark on his shoulder. It was glaringly obvious. I froze. Did I do that? What do you think? Michael glanced at the mark himself, raising an eyebrow. Last night, I came back to help you take off your shoes, and you insisted I was Scott. You said you'd bite me, and then you did. I gave him an awkward laugh. Sorry, I drank too much last night. Leaning back against the bed, Michael lit a cigarette. His tone indifferent. Is that so? You were so drunk you couldn't even tell who I was. I frowned. What do you mean? Michael took a drag from his cigarette and then turned to look at me. With a playful smirk, he exhaled a puff of smoke in my direction, the haze blurring his features. He spoke softly. You mistook me for your scumbag ex. First, you yelled at me. Then he paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing slightly. His expression almost contemplative, like he was savoring the memory. Seeing that look on his face, my cheeks burned. What was he talking about? What did I mistake you for? I asked quietly, my voice tinged with guilt. I knew what I was like when drunk. Getting the wrong person was nothing new. Michael glanced at me, casually flicking the ash from his cigarette into the trash. You hugged me and asked why I cheated on you. Then asked if they were prettier than you. And then? Michael's lips curved into a faint smile. Then you said, why are you so handsome? And tackled me. Oh. My God. I stared at the bite mark on his shoulder, stunned, my mind spinning with how I was going to explain this to Anna. She treated me like a sister, and I had ruined her son. My thoughts were such a mess that I instinctively chose to flee. So, as Michael wrapped a towel around himself and went to the bathroom for a shower, I quickly got dressed and slipped out of the apartment. As soon as I bolted out the door, I realized this was my house. Where exactly was I running to? But I couldn't think about that. It was the weekend, so I fled to the library, where I spent the entire day holding a book, but failing to turn a single page. As dusk settled, I debated for a long time, before finally hailing a cab back home. Carefully, I unlocked the door. The room was dark, with no lights on. I exhaled a sigh of relief and glanced at the entryway. There were no men's shoes, no sign of Michael. After closing the door, I thoroughly searched the apartment. There was no trace of him. In fact, the entire place was spotless, as if someone had come by to clean it from top to bottom. On the dining table was a freshly prepared dinner, still warm and smelling delicious. This godson of mine, whom I had thrown myself at last night, was like a kind-hearted prince. Not only did he not demand I take responsibility, but he had also cleaned my apartment to perfection. My place had never been this clean before. The windows sparkled, the bedding had been changed, and even the toilet had been scrubbed. Seeing how considerate he had been, I started to feel guilty. Good-looking, fit, well-mannered, professional, and now even domestic, this perfect young man had been utterly ruined by me. And to top it off, I wasn't taking responsibility. No matter how I thought about it, I felt awful. But I was too much of a coward. I opened Michael's contact info, hesitated for a long time, and ultimately said nothing. For the entire weekend, I avoided the issue. Michael also made no attempt to contact me. After our one unforgettable night, it was as if he had never existed. A mix of impatience and regret bubbled inside me. After all, we had been intimate. Was he really not the slightest bit interested? With these thoughts gnawing at me, I barely slept that night. The next morning, I showed up at work with dark circles under my eyes. I hadn't been at my desk for long when Anna arrived. Feeling guilty, I couldn't even lift my head to look at her. Who knew if Michael had told her anything? Anna was as enthusiastic as ever. She sat down beside me, affectionately patting my shoulder. Fiona, let me tell you something. Michael's finally come around. Hearing his name, I froze. What happened? Anna took a sip of her coffee and, smiling brightly, began to share. This morning, I casually mentioned that he should go on a blind date. And guess what? I perked up, listening intently. Anna, delighted by her son's sudden change, leaned in and whispered, he agreed right away. He agreed? The excitement in Anna's voice was the polar opposite of what I felt. In that moment, my heart sank like a stone. I couldn't even begin to explain how I felt. A mix of regret, anger, and sadness washed over me. Sitting at my desk, I stared blankly ahead, the corners of my lips twitching into a self-deprecating smile. I deserved this. I was the one who had insisted on taking him as my godson, who had drunk too much, who had run away. More than anything, I was frustrated with myself for feeling so low over a man 2 years younger than me. Anna, oblivious to my turmoil, kept talking. She eagerly described Michael's blind date. A sweet, adorable teacher 2 years younger than him, perfect in every way. Finally, she asked, Fiona, don't you think they'd make a great match? I nodded. Yes, they sound perfect. The rest of the day, I was completely out of it. At around 3 p.m., a coworker ordered coffee. When the delivery person walked in, I stood up suddenly. Michael? My shout immediately drew everyone's attention, including the delivery guy. But when he lifted his head, I came back to my senses. It wasn't Michael. Just someone with a vaguely similar build. Awkwardly, I waved it off with a sheepish smile. Sorry, I mistook you for someone else. I glanced sideways thankfully, Anna wasn't around. However, as I sat back down, staring at my silent phone, a pang of realization struck me. I was doomed. Completely and utterly doomed, caught in the web of a younger, dangerously handsome, slightly roguish man. That day, I sat at my desk, pretending to work harder than ever. I barely even left for the restroom. Yet, despite staring at my computer for hours, I didn't get a single task done. Dazed and lost in thought, I dragged myself through the day. After greeting Anna and bidding her goodbye, I left the office, moving sluggishly. Facing Anna still made me feel guilty. She treated me like a sister, and I had slept with her son. Suddenly, someone stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Lowering my gaze, I first noticed a pair of white sneakers, followed by a light-colored tracksuit. Then, I looked up straight into an impossibly handsome face. What are you thinking about? You're not even watching where you're going. His voice was low, with a hint of reproach. I snapped back to reality, instinctively glancing around. Relax. My mom already left, Michael said before I could ask. I sighed in relief, then tilted my head up at him. What are you doing here? Michael responded almost instantly, raising an eyebrow as he leaned in slightly. Looking for you. Looking for me? I instinctively turned my head to avoid his gaze. Yes, he said. I want you to be my girlfriend. The confession came so abruptly and directly that I froze, my heart racing wildly. I stammered for a while, completely at a loss for words. But just as my nerves reached their peak, Michael doused them with a bucket of cold water. I'm joking, he said. My mom set me up on a blind date, and I want you to pretend to be my girlfriend to get out of it. Right. I frowned. I'm your godmother. That's inappropriate. You should find someone else to play the role. As soon as I finished speaking, Michael grabbed my wrist without another word, dragged me to his car parked by the curb, and practically shoved me into the passenger seat. Once the car door closed, I sat stiffly in my seat, not making a move. Michael leaned over, reaching across to buckle my seatbelt for me. The faint scent of his cologne wafted toward me, subtle, familiar, and oddly intoxicating. After securing the belt, Michael didn't sit back. Instead, he remained in the same position, leaning close. Fiona, he said. His voice low, do you remember what happened that night? With one hand pressed against my car door, he was barely 10 inches away. His breath brushed against my face as he spoke, sending a faint tickle down my skin. The mention of that night made me tense up immediately. Michael, why don't I hesitated before saying, why don't I give you some money as compensation? Michael seemed momentarily stunned. After a pause, he straightened, resting one hand on the steering wheel. His fingers tightened slightly as he chuckled. All right, how much do you think I'm worth? I blinked in surprise. Honestly, I hadn't expected him to actually entertain the idea. After all, no matter who initiated that night, it was clear I'd end up taking the loss. After a moment's hesitation, I slowly held up one finger and tentatively asked, 1,000? Michael's lips curved into a slight smile. Fiona. Even a mid-tier club charges more than that. I thought about it. He wasn't wrong. With a face like Michael's, he'd be the top pick anywhere. How much do you want, then? I figured, given my relationship with his mom, Michael wouldn't go overboard with his demands. But I was wrong. He absolutely would. Without hesitation, he raised the price tenfold, 10,000. I frowned, immediately resorting to excuses. That's way too much. No money. Michael nodded as if he had expected it. No money, huh? Fine, well, do it another way. I looked up at him, waiting for his next move. The way you bullied me that night? Tonight, I'll bully you back the same way. Absolutely not. Michael leaned back slightly, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. Then there's only one option left. Fake being my girlfriend to get my mom off my back. The first half of his statement was fine, but the second half made me hesitate. Still, after some deliberation, I agreed. It wasn't really three options, this was the only choice I had left. However, as we pulled up to the restaurant and stepped out of the car, I finally started to process what was happening. Why did I even need to make a choice in the first place? What's this talk of compensation? Wasn't it me who brought it up out of guilt? Since he was the one making wild demands, I could have just refused. Instead, I let him steer me into a series of choices. What a mess. Sighing in resignation, I followed Michael into the restaurant. When we reached the entrance, Michael suddenly stopped and turned to look at me. If we're going to act, we might as well do it right. With that, he raised his arm. I froze for a second, then silently looped my arm through his. Together, we walked to a table. I thought we'd just put on a quick show, but the situation took an unexpected turn. As soon as we sat down, I realized there were already two people seated across from us. A man and a woman. Clearly a couple. I say clearly because they were in the middle of an intensely passionate kiss when we arrived. It was obvious that the girl, who was supposed to be Michael's blind date, had deliberately brought her boyfriend along to make a statement and sabotage the setup. But the twist? Her boyfriend wasn't just anyone. The guy holding her and kissing her so passionately was none other than Scott. Yes, that Scott. The same ex-boyfriend who, just days ago, told me that every girl he'd been with was just a fling. The four of us stared at each other, stunned. Scott and I gawked at each other in shock, while the girl stared intently at Michael's face. Judging by her expression, she might have been reconsidering her decision. Looks, after all, are the sharpest weapon. I snapped out of it and glanced up at Michael. Thankfully, he didn't seem the least bit swayed by the girl's youth or beauty. His face was stoic, revealing no emotions. The tension grew thicker and thicker until Michael finally broke the silence. He casually draped an arm around me, pulling me closer with a low chuckle. Since everyone here already has a partner, let's just call off the blind date. We can all go home and explain to our families. No harm done, right? He was about to lead me away when the girl abruptly stood up. I don't agree. Michael froze mid-step. Turning back to look at her, his tone grew noticeably cooler. Go ahead, I'm listening. The girl brushed off Scott and walked over, tilting her head slightly as she looked Michael up and down. I've changed my mind. Michael didn't reply, but his brow furrowed slightly. I quietly observed the young woman in front of me. Youth has its perks, dressed provocatively, with smooth skin and a gaze both lively and self-assured. Next to her, I couldn't help but feel a little insecure. Young girls are so much prettier, I thought. Women like me, no longer youthful or sexy, get labeled as mature at best. The girl tilted her chin up and looked at Michael, speaking with refreshing directness. I think you're great. This blind date can continue. Michael seemed to chuckle softly but said nothing. Then he glanced at her lips and said, First, wipe off the drool on your mouth. She froze, quickly using the back of her hand to wipe her lips. That drool, of course, wasn't hers, it belonged to the dazed Scott sitting across the table. Michael casually rested his arm on my shoulder, glancing back and forth between her and Scott. Isn't your boyfriend sitting right there? What's the point of a blind date? The girl crossed her arms. He's not my boyfriend, she declared. Michael raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. He's just a hookup, she added nonchalantly. I was taken aback. Wow, these young girls these days really are bold. Michael seemed a little stunned, too. After a brief pause, he shook his head and wrapped an arm around me as we left. Before walking out, he casually muttered 3 words, she's crazy. Behind us, I heard the girl grumbling in dissatisfaction and unsurprisingly arguing with Scott. Michael's arm stayed firmly around me as we exited the restaurant, and he made no move to let go. I nudged him. He didn't budge. Had enough of taking advantage of me? Nope, he replied with a mischievous grin, tightening his grip on my shoulder. Our eyes met, and for some reason, I felt a little flustered. To cover it up, I tried to push him away again. But Michael was too strong. Instead of pushing him, he caught my hand against his chest. Alright, have you had enough? I thought he was scolding me, but his tone suddenly shifted to something entirely unexpected, a confession. Let's be together. I froze in place. After a long pause, I tilted my head up at him, disbelief written all over my face. What did you just say? Michael raised his hand, lightly ruffling my hair. The gesture reminded me of someone petting a cat. His soft chuckle accompanied a face so unbearably handsome that it made my heart race. I said, "Why don't we be together?" I was speechless. For the few moments I stayed silent, Michael's hand slid from my head, the warmth of his palm grazing the back of my neck before settling gently there. He leaned in slightly, his gaze locking with mine. How about it? His voice was so gentle, yet it left me completely at a loss for words. I decided to hold my ground with stubborn defiance. No way, but as I spoke, I tilted my head, avoiding his eyes. Michael stayed silent for a couple of seconds. Then, leaning in closer, he gently grasped my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. If you really want to reject me, look into my eyes and tell me you don't feel anything for me. Forced to look up, I found myself staring directly into his eyes. In his pupils, I could see my own reflection. The words I wanted to say stuck in my throat, impossible to get out. I couldn't say it because deep down, I did feel something for him. We seemed to lock eyes for an eternity. Then Michael spoke softly, breaking the silence. My gaze shifted slightly downward, landing on his Adam's apple as it moved subtly when he spoke. Have you ever heard that boys can't maintain eye contact with someone they like? I blinked, startled, and shook my head. I honestly hadn't heard that before. But in the next moment, Michael suddenly and without warning leaned down and kissed me. Because he murmured against my lips, "It's impossible not to want to kiss her." His lips were soft and warm, carrying the faintly familiar scent of Michael. On the busy street outside the restaurant, I was so tense I could barely breathe. My hands clutched tightly at Michael's shirt, trying to push him away, but I couldn't summon the strength to do so. The kiss was brief, just a light brush. However, before we could pull away, a shocked voice rang out from behind us. "Michael, Fiona?" You two. We turned to see Anna, dressed in a bright floral dress, staring at us in disbelief. My mind went blank. Almost instinctively, I let go of Michael's hand. "What?" Beside me, Michael muttered in dissatisfaction and then stubbornly took my hand again, locking our fingers together. Forced into holding his hand, I grew even more flustered. In just a few seconds, my palm was already damp with nervous sweat. Anna, in her vibrant floral dress, stood a short distance away, watching us with a curious smile. I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. God, how was I supposed to explain this? "Anna, I let lust cloud my judgment and slept with your son? I'd rather just die." While I was busy spiraling in panic, Michael's low, exasperated chuckle reached my ears. "Alright, Mom, stop teasing my girlfriend." I froze, looking up at him in shock. Then I turned to Anna, who was smiling warmly as she studied the two of us, and heard her say something that left me utterly dumbfounded. Michael's tactic actually worked. Who would have thought I'd lose a good friend but gain a daughter-in-law instead? Her use of the term daughter-in-law left me blushing furiously. But it also made me realize something. I turned to Michael, narrowing my eyes suspiciously. "What tactic did you use on me?" Michael rubbed the tip of his nose, looking slightly awkward. "Actually, there was no blind date to begin with. The day after we slept together, my mom already knew about us and she also figured you'd panic and run away. So, that so-called blind date just now was someone I hired." Michael looked at me with what could only be described as genuine sincerity. "She's our neighbor. We grew up together. I paid her $200 to play the part." "So her making out with Scott, was that part of your plan too?" "Scott?" Michael blinked in confusion before clarifying. "I just asked her to pretend to be my blind date. Everything else was her own improvisation." Wow. That girl was a true performer. But before I could process the situation, Michael leaned in closer, his gaze piercing as he locked eyes with me. "By the way," he said slowly, "don't you think it's about time you explain who Scott is?" I licked my lips nervously, realizing I'd slipped up. He's that girl's boyfriend. And also my ex. Michael stared at me for a moment. Your ex-boyfriend? Under his intense scrutiny, I grew anxious. After a brief hesitation, I nodded honestly. The one you mistook me for when you were drunk? My head felt like it was about to explode. Yes, the words had barely left my lips before Michael turned around and walked off. Panicking, I grabbed his arm. Where are you going? For a brief moment, I feared he might be so upset that he'd end things with me right here. But I was wrong. Michael had no intention of breaking up. He just wanted to punch Scott. I tried to stop him, but failed. Michael marched back into the restaurant and delivered a solid beating to Scott, who was still tangled up with the girl he'd come with. The same Michael who had sat in his office just days ago, all calm and refined in his white coat, turned out to be just as formidable when throwing punches. It took all my effort to pull him away. As I glanced at Scott, now thoroughly beaten and too terrified to fight back, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of satisfaction. The resentment from being cheated on, though Olivia had helped me take revenge years ago, still felt satisfying to release once more. Yet throughout the entire ordeal, the young girl never stepped in to stop Michael. Instead, she leisurely sipped a glass of lemon water, watching the drama unfold with a calm and amused expression. Afterward, I couldn't help but ask her a question. Aren't you two dating? The girl laughed, arching her delicate brows confidently. What I said earlier was partly true. He's just a hookup, nothing more. Besides, she paused for effect, then added with a sly grin. Michael beat up my hookup. He'd better compensate me with someone even hotter. His group of friends is basically a goldmine, a bunch of ridiculously handsome doctors. They're the perfect mix of bad boy charm and polished professionalism, total refined scoundrels. Her description even had me a little intrigued. But whatever flicker of interest arose in my heart was swiftly smothered by Michael. Cupping my face in his hands, he furrowed his brows and threatened, "Don't even think about it. Do you really think they're better looking than me?" Forced to stare into his face, I studied him carefully, then shook my head. Michael pinched my chin, kissed me lightly, and whispered in my ear, "And they definitely aren't as bad as me." The memories of the previous night came rushing back, and my cheeks flushed red. He was right, Michael was undeniably bad. A textbook definition of a refined scoundrel. The night we officially got together, Michael and I bought some drinks and went back to my place. We played a little game of truth-telling. The rules were simple. I asked questions, and he answered. So, I began, was it love at first sight for you? Michael chuckled softly, his long, elegant fingers wrapped around a can of beer. Yes and no. Speak plainly, I demanded. He took a sip of beer before replying, it was love at first sight, but not at the moment you're thinking of. I frowned, confused by his cryptic answer. That's when Michael confessed something unexpected. The first time he saw me wasn't when Anna introduced us. It was the day I went to interview for my new job. It had been a terrible day, thunderstorms, heavy traffic, and I had jumped out of a taxi to sprint toward the company, only to witness a car accident. A sedan had failed to slow down while turning, skidding on the wet road and hitting a middle-aged man on a bicycle. The man lay on the ground, faint traces of blood surrounding him. Many bystanders gathered, some calling for an ambulance, but no one stepped forward to help. The car involved in the accident sped off, leaving the man alone on the rain-soaked pavement. I hesitated, torn between being late for my interview and helping him. Finally, I couldn't bear it. I ran over, held an umbrella over the injured man, and stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. At the time, I thought my chances of getting hired were ruined. I was late and soaked to the bone. But to my surprise, the interviewer seemed to know what had happened and offered me the job after the interview. It wasn't until today that Michael admitted what really happened. He had coincidentally passed by that day and seen a petite young woman shivering in the cold rain, shielding an injured man with her umbrella. And when he approached to offer help, he overheard the young woman muttering to herself, "Great. This interview's definitely doomed. Mom's going to kill me when I get home." Michael confessed that, in that moment, he found the rain-soaked girl with her rosy, wind-chilled cheeks utterly endearing. I listened, dumbfounded. That's it? Michael nodded seriously, that's it. Love really is like a tornado, it sweeps in with no rhyme or reason. After a few more drinks, something suddenly didn't feel right to me. Wait. How did the interviewer know I helped someone out? I sent him a picture of you holding the umbrella, Michael replied nonchalantly. How did you even know I was interviewing for that company? Michael shrugged casually. I didn't. It was a guess. There aren't many companies in the area. And that one happened to be urgently hiring. So that was it. I sighed in genuine amazement. Our company is surprisingly humane. So many companies these days couldn't care less about qualities like kindness or helping others, they'd rather see you deliver a flawless project. Michael went quiet for a moment before saying, actually, the company isn't humane with just anyone. I frowned. What do you mean? Michael took another swig of beer, crushed the empty can in his hand, and winked at me. Because the CEO of that company is my dad. I stared at him in shock. So Anna, my mom, can't sit still, he explained, so she anonymously took a job at my dad's company. Partly to pass the time, partly to keep an eye on him. I suddenly remembered hearing about our company's CEO, young-looking, wealthy, and perpetually surrounded by ambitious women vying for his attention. No wonder. Anna was always so strict with those girls. Now that I thought about it, all those women who frequently visited the CEO's office eventually resigned. What a brilliant move. The boss wife went undercover to clean up her husband's potential scandals herself. But I tilted my head at Michael. So from the very beginning, your mom knew that you liked me? I phrased it vaguely, embarrassed to be too direct. Michael smiled. Of course not. Do you think she would have let me call you my godmother if she did? She liked you because you never tried to curry favor with my dad. You worked hard, kept your head down, and didn't seek shortcuts, so she admired you for that. She misunderstood, though. She thought I wasn't interested in women, so instead of trying to set us up, she enthusiastically made you her best friend and, as a result of some wild thinking, had me call you my godmother. Michael chuckled when he saw the disbelief on my face. Then he added with a mischievous grin, oops, I mean godmom. I rolled my eyes at him and silently pieced everything together in my head. So, on the day of my interview, I did something small and selfless that inadvertently caught Michael's attention. He guessed that I might be interviewing at his dad's company and sent a photo of me holding the umbrella to the interviewer as a hint. I ended up applying to his dad's company and was smoothly hired. Later, since I didn't try to cozy up to the charming and wealthy CEO, Anna, the undercover boss wife, took a liking to me. Believing her son wasn't interested in women, she didn't bother introducing us for a blind date. Instead, she unexpectedly made Michael call me his godmother. What she couldn't have anticipated, though, was that I would turn her precious son and transform from her best friend into her future daughter-in-law. I tilted my head back and took a long gulp of ice-cold beer. Suddenly, my life felt like the plot of a drama series. One twist after another. The confession game continued. Michael had laid everything bare, and then it was suddenly my turn. He took a sip of beer and leaned in closer. The proximity was so close that I could catch the faint scent of alcohol on him. Michael studied me quietly, his gaze sweeping over my face, before his lips curved into a faint smile. Fiona, so how are you planning to make it up to me for mistaking me for someone else that night? How did he manage to bring this up again? I licked my lips nervously, testing the waters. Hasn't that already passed? It hasn't, Michael denied firmly. That incident caused me emotional trauma. As he spoke, his smile grew more mischievous. Leaning forward, he braced himself against the wall, effectively trapping me in the corner of the sofa. His voice dropped to a husky whisper, Godmom, God help me, who could resist this? I turned my head to avoid looking at him. What do you want me to do to make it up to you? Hearing my question, Michael chuckled softly. How about recreating that scene, this time while you're sober? I froze for a moment, then quickly downed the beer in my hand in one go. I'm drunk, I declared. Michael let out a low laugh, his palm suddenly covering my eyes. Too late. The next moment, warmth pressed against my lips. And then he really did recreate the scene. That moment confirmed it for me. Michael was the epitome of a refined scoundrel. Refined most of the time and a scoundrel when it suited him.